How often do we truly pause, to examine the very foundations of knowledge in a field? Especially one like psychology that's always changing.
Yeah, what trends are shaping its path, and maybe more importantly, what gets sort of left behind.
Exactly. Are we potentially losing something vital as things evolve?
Those are really big questions, and they're not just historical curiosities. They touch on how we understand ourselves right now.
Which is why today we're doing a deep dive into a really powerful historical document. It's called the Psychologist's Frame of Reference.
That's right. It was originally a presidential address given by Gordon W. Allport back in 1939.
1939. It was published a year later, 1940, in the Psychological Bulletin.
And you have to think about the context. 1939, Europe was entering a really dark period.
Right, a heavy darkness, as Allport put it. So a lot of the responsibility for psychology's progress kind of fell onto American psychologists.
Yeah, thankfully they had help from some incredibly gifted emigres who'd recently arrived, but the pressure was definitely on.
So Allport's mission back then, which is kind of our mission today too, was to look critically at American psychology's credentials.
He charted its course over the 50 years before that, so from about 1888 to 1938.
And he wanted to see if the trends he observed suggested, wholesome growth.
And whether psychology was actually extending its beneficial influences to humanity at large. A pretty bold goal.
So how did he even approach this? It wasn't just him thinking out loud, right?
Oh, absolutely not. His method was incredibly thorough. He worked with Jerome Bruner.
Ah, Bruner, another big name.
Right. And they analyzed over 1,600 articles.
1,600, wow.
Yeah, from 14 top journals looking at every 10th year between 1888 and 1938.
That's some serious legwork.
It really was. They sorted these articles into 32 different categories or rubrics.
Okay.
And they had checks, independent classifiers agreeing something like 91% of the time. So the data was pretty solid.
So this was a real data-driven look at the field. What did they find? What was changing?
Well, Allport highlighted several shifts, but maybe the most striking were the things that seemed to be disappearing from psychology during that time.
Disappearing? Like what?
One big one was what he called facultative treatments. Things like instinct or the power of attention.
Sort of like easy explanations, like saying someone did something because of instinct without really explaining the how or why.
Exactly. He called them deus ex machina explanations, just dropping in a term to solve the problem.
Yeah.
He even saw newer terms like factors or libido starting to fall into that same trap.
Interesting. So move away from simple labels.
Yeah.
What else was fading?
Well, this one's fascinating. The body-mind problem.
It's a classic philosophical question. How could that disappear?
Right. You'd think it'd be central. But Allport found that earlier psychologists tried to tackle it head-on, with monistic or dualistic theories.
Mm-hmm.
But by his time, the trend was more to just deny its existence as a problem.
Deny it? How?
Often leaning on what he called Vienna logic, a kind of logical positivism. Basically, if you can't empirically measure or solve it neatly, maybe the question itself is meaningless.
Wow. Okay. That's a bold move.
It is. And related to that, even though psychoanalysis was big elsewhere, the main journals he surveyed showed a loss of faith in the causal efficacy of the unconscious.
So the unconscious was becoming less central in mainstream academic psychology.
In those specific journals, yes. And there was also a shift away from thinking about processes like intelligence or learning as real things or entities.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, the focus moved towards methodological formalism. Getting the methods right was key. They wanted to avoid hypostatization, treating an abstract concept like intelligence as if it were a concrete object.
So less focus on the what and more on the how of studying it.
Precisely. But maybe the most surprising finding, for me anyway, was about language.
Language. What happened there?
Allport found a really marked decline in studies of higher mental processes that actually used human language, things like reasoning, concept formation.
Wait, so psychologists were studying the mind less by looking at how we use language?
It seems so. He actually said the distinctively human function of language has a decreasing appeal for psychologists.
That sounds counterintuitive.
It really does.
Yeah.
He noted the only increase was in studies using animals, or, get this, human subjects who for the duration of the experiment are rendered totally speechless.
Speechless? Seriously.
Right.
That's quite a finding. What does that even imply?
Well, it suggests a move towards behaviors that are easier to observe and quantify, perhaps, even if it means ignoring a huge part of human experience.
Yeah, that definitely makes you think. What else was on the decline?
Interest in the single case, study the idiographic view.
So understanding one individual really deeply, like a clinical case study.
Exactly. That was becoming less valued. Allport said it was almost ruled out of court. There seemed to be less interest in what the individual case can teach us. The focus shifted to finding general laws, not understanding unique individuals.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier he talked about a cleavage.
Yes, a professional cleavage. He saw a distinct falling off in articles in the core journals that dealt with applied psychology or, social betterment.
So the academics were separating from the practitioners?
It looked that way. He concluded that pure and applied psychology were parting ways. The writers in these top journals seemed to be getting more remote from living issues.
More abstract, less engaged with the real world.
That was his concern. And one last thing on the decline: history.
The history of psychology itself.
Yeah. Fewer historical surveys, fewer papers bothering to place their experiments in historical context. It suggested psychologists felt a kind of independence of the past, like they didn't need to build on what came before.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff feeding out. But things were rising too, right? What was gaining ground?
Oh, definitely. And some trends were really taking off. Statistics, for one.
Makes sense, with a focus on quantification.
Absolutely. He found striking evidence of increased use of statistical tools range, variability, correlation. By his time, nearly half of all the articles used them heavily.
Half, that's huge.
It is. And tied to that, the rise of animal subjects was dramatic.
You mentioned that earlier. How big was the increase?
It went from about 3.5% in the early years he studied up to over 15% by 1938.
Okay.
And at the APA meeting the year he gave the address, 1939, a full quarter of the papers were based on animal research.
A quarter. Why the big shift?
Crucially, the purpose changed. It wasn't just studying animal behavior for its own sake anymore.
No,
the idea was that animals could reveal a kind of universal psychology principles that apply to all animals, including humans.
Ah, okay.
Ha!
Search for general laws again.
Exactly. We also saw a resurgence in physiological research, not just looking for correlations with conscious experience, but direct studies using techniques like extirpation, removing parts of the brain, and electrical recording.
So getting much more biological, blurring the lines with physiology.
Definitely. But it wasn't all reductionist. There was also a growing appreciation for context.
Context. How so?
A trend towards seeing psychological processes as differentiated within a total context. This was influenced by things like modern neurology and Gestalt theory.
Gestalt's right. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Sort of, yeah. So you saw more studies looking at things like physical and mental growth over time, figure ground perception, field theory, acknowledging that the surrounding situation matters.
That sounds like a positive trend.
It could be. And unsurprisingly, given the other trends, there was a big increase in studies about methodology itself.
Meta-studies. Papers on how to do psychology.
Kind of. Less about the philosophical nature of psychological data and more about practicalities, getting rid of entities, arguing about constructs versus intervening variables, the how-to of science.
And that led to operationism.
Yes, operationism was really taking off. Allport called it a magic concept, especially after Bridgman's book in 1928.
And operationism is defining something by how you measure it.
Essentially, yes. Defining a concept strictly by the concrete operations used to measure or produce it. Very focused on observable actions.
Okay, so we have these declines and these rising tides. What did Allport make of all this? What was his big takeaway?
Well, he saw a significant danger in all this. He called it the raid on immediate experience.
The raid on immediate experience. What did he mean?
He felt there was this growing idea that subjective personal experience immediatism had to be replaced by a public outdoor attitude toward our knowledge. Everything had to be objective, observable from the outside.
So your inner feelings, thoughts, judgments, they weren't considered valid data.
Increasingly, no. The modernist view was that psychology should instantly supplant direct experience with these indirect objective formulations. He even quotes E.G. Boring, making the pretty extreme claim that private experience does not exist.
Wow. Private experience does not exist. That's bold.
Right. And Allport worried about the consequence that researchers were cutting themselves off from the benefit and counsel of our ordinary perceptions, feelings, judgments, and intuitions.
Leading to what he called a grotesque lack of fit between the research findings and people's actual lived lives.
Exactly. This raid on experience tied directly into those declining trends we talked about, losing interest in language, the single case, history.
It created a gap.
Yes, what he saw as a notable schism between the psychology constructed in a laboratory and the psychology constructed on the field of life. Two different worlds.
So going back to the animal research, how did he connect that to this schism? Was it just about finding universal laws?
He suspected it was partly about status, too. Animal research was delightfully suitable for the exercise of objective and approved methods. It made psychologists feel like real scientists, like physicists or biologists.
Ah, the lure of scientific respectability.
Right. And he threw down this amazing challenge. He asked, basically, can you name any significant human psychological problem that can be solved just by studying rats?
He actually asked that. What examples did he give of things rats couldn't solve?
Oh, he listed quite a few. Reading disability, appreciating art or humor, religious experience, cultural behaviors, poetry, puns, propaganda, planning for the future, and even humanity's despairing hope for peace.
Okay, point taken. You're not solving world peace with a rat maze.
His core point was that human problem solving is completely saturated with language. You can't just assume findings from nonverbal animals directly apply to language using humans without checking very carefully.
That makes sense. So if understanding was becoming problematic, what about prediction? That's a major goal of science, right? Could psychology at least predict behavior?
Well, Allport was pretty skeptical there, too. Outside of very specific, narrow lab tasks, he felt psychologists could predict very little concerning human conduct.
Really? But what about things like predicting success on parole or in a job?
He made a crucial distinction there between actuarial prediction, predicting for a group, let's say 72% of this group will succeed,
Right.
and individual prediction, saying what will happen to this specific person. For an individual, he argued, the prediction is really either 0% or 100% if you take a deterministic view. You either will or you won't. The group average doesn't tell you about the specific case.
That's a subtle but important difference.
It is. And he even cheekily suggested that psychologists might learn more about prediction by studying statesmen, psychiatrists, lawyers, and even head waiters.
Head waiters?
Yeah.
Yeah. His point was that people in those roles often had a much better practical ability to forecast individual human behavior than psychologists did at the time. Okay, that's quite a critique. This seems to lead into his discussion of Verstehen, the German concept.
Exactly. Verstehen, it means understanding or comprehension. For Allport, it was about the ability to place information within its proper context, within the subject's own pattern of thought.
So understanding things from the other person's point of view.
Precisely. His criticism was that psychologists were too often ignoring or even disrupting the subject's frame of reference. They were interpreting behavior through their own theories and assumptions.
And in doing that, they lost sight of
what the organism is trying by himself to do. They miss the individual's own goals, intentions, and meanings.
And how did operationism fit into this? You said it had a hidden cost.
Well, operationism is great for clear definitions, right? Define aggression by the number of times someone pushes a button. Very clear.
Sure.
But Allport warned, if the concept simply becomes the operations, you risk what he called senseless pluralism. Every different way you measure aggression becomes a different kind of aggression. You end up with a million tiny definitions and lose any unified understanding.
It fragments the concept.
Yeah. And leads to an anesthesia for understanding. You get lost in the details of measurement and lose the feel for the actual phenomenon.
And this all culminates in his critique of methodism.
Yes. The danger when fidelity to method, doing the science right according to the current rules, becomes the only requirement.
Not whether the findings are meaningful or useful.
Exactly. Allport worried this led to a weariness, a sense that science is just a game, a formal ritual. It loses its connection to life, its purpose of generating useful knowledge, like focusing so much on the recipe rules you forget about making food people want to eat.
It sounds like a pretty bleak picture he painted. Was there any hope? Did he see any positive counter trends?
He did, thankfully. He wasn't entirely pessimistic. He saw strong revival of interest in the problems of context.
Context again.
Yes, especially understanding the structure of human personality within its social environment.
And that connects to his title, right? The Psychologist's frame of reference.
Exactly. He defined frame of reference very broadly. Any context, whatever, that exerts a demonstrable influence upon the individual's perceptions, judgments, feelings, or actions. Often these frames are silent. We're not even aware of them.
Okay.
And he saw understanding these frames, especially the investigator's own frame, as crucial for repairing the ravages caused by only seeing behavior through the researcher's lens.
So recognizing our own biases and assumptions.
Yes, and recognizing the subject's frame, too. He noted that social and dynamic psychologists were getting very interested in these personal and ego-involving frames, showing how even scientific judgments get tangled up in our own personalities.
That's fascinating. And he even brought in politics, referencing John Dewey.
He did. Dewey had pointed out 40 years earlier that psychology is politically conditioned. Allport gave a chilling, concrete example from his time.
What was that?
He mentioned the 1938 president of the German Psychological Society. This individual was praising studies aimed at identifying the national genotypus, the countertype to the desired national character, associated with individualism and intellectualism.
Wow. Using psychology for political ends.
Explicitly. And this same person warned against mental tests introduced by William Stern, who was Jewish, and mentioned colleagues being censured. It's a stark reminder of how political ideology can distort science.
Absolutely, and Allport contrasted that with
the relative freedom in American democracy, which allowed for, in his words, diversified investigation and a diversified sense of importance, different approaches could coexist.
So what was his final plea? His call to action?
He urged his colleagues, and by extension us, to avoid authoritarianism in science. Don't let psychology become a cult that shuts down original and daring inquiry.
Don't demand slavish subservience to just one way of doing things.
Exactly. Don't insist everything must be empirical, mechanistic, or quantitative. Psychology also needs to be rational, teleological, understanding purpose, qualitative, ideographic, synoptic, seeing the big picture, and even non-operational at times.
He argued the great historical insights came from those unfashionable approaches.
Yes. Think of Aristotle, Locke, James, Freud. Their breakthroughs often used methods that wouldn't pass muster under a strict, narrow definition of science prevalent then.
So the ultimate test isn't just methodological purity.
No. For Allport, the ultimate test should be whether psychology actually enhances, above the level of common sense, our ability to predict, understand, and control human action. Does it actually help us in the real world?
Predict, understand, and control.
Okay, so his final recommendation was to boost research into complex human mental organization, into those frames of reference, into the subject's viewpoint, and into the very act of understanding, or Verstehen.
It's incredible how relevant his words from 1939 feel today. It really leaves you with a question, doesn't it?
It does. In our own work, our own thinking about psychology today.
How might our current frames of reference, the methods we favor, the questions we ask, the assumptions we make, be shaping what we find?
And maybe what are we inadvertently leaving out? What insights might still be hidden in those approaches Allport called unfashionable?
A really profound challenge to keep in mind as the field continues to evolve.